Once there was a ruler called King Stefan. King Stefan was the pride of his people. Not only was he wise, talented, but he was very clever and also very handsome.
King Stefan ruled over the village of Mana. Mana was so beautiful a village that everybody envied it. Not only envied, but admired. This village was so beautiful. It was the envy of all the seven kingdoms. The streams flowed so quietly. The nature was rich. The wildlife was so exquisite. Everybody was happy in the kingdom of Mana, and they had no problems. The people were also so wise, kind, and knowledgeable. They were so nice to everyone around them. So the kingdom of Mana was virtually a paradise for everyone to live in. The king did have a chief priest called Otunda. Otunda was a very fair man and a believer that everything should be done right. He was very brave and also very loyal to the king. But Otunda was somehow very old-fashioned and a very old man. So because of this, when matters arose of great importance in the kingdom, Otunda sometimes had conflicts with how King Stefan would handle his problems. This caused some issues between the king and Otunda, but nothing time and patience couldn't solve. Now the kingdom had very beautiful women. They were so beautiful, dark-skinned, gorgeous, and so lovely. Everyone wanted to have the women of Mana as their wives. King Stefan himself had 14 wives. It's already reported Mana lacked nothing. But a few years into the decade, strange reports started reaching the ears of King Stefan. It was noted that some strange magical creatures had appeared in the village. They terrified everyone, especially women and children. Finally, the cause of all the commotion had been found out in the village, and the people couldn't believe it. They were all in shock. The creatures causing the commotion, all the commotion were magical dwarfs. Now a little history lesson. This particular set of dwarfs were called Adobe. They were always sent as lesson teachers or curses to people who did wrong. And sometimes, mad people saw them before they went mad. So they were basically curses to bad people. And it was a bad sight to even see one of these dwarfs, not to mention hundreds. Men who were lost in dark forest reported seeing these creatures, and they never spoke. Women who did really evil things in their youth always gave birth to these creatures. And the wonderful thing is, every time their work was done, they completely vanished. So it was unusual to even spot them. Sometimes they would be invisible to everyone, especially if you are not the person they are planning to curse. So we can all imagine what happened when the people saw these creatures. They were in shock, they were baffled, they even considered praying to their gods. Everybody was so panicked and terrified. Some people even started exiting the village of Mana because they could not stay in these kinds of situations. The dwarves too were also very much scary, very much alive. And they spoke in such a scary tone. It scared everyone. The king, Stefan, now knew something had to be done. He immediately called his kinsmen and the chief priest. The chief priest, with immediate no hesitation, said the dwarves had to be kicked out and the land purified of all their sins. King Stefan then summoned all of the dwarves, preparing to sack them from their land. The dwarves saw immediately what was going on and how their way of life was going to be disturbed. They immediately begged the people of the land and King Stefan and told King Stefan of the story of how they had been created in droves as punishment to another village for their terrible sins towards the gods of their land and their own people. But this time, as the dwarfs continue, when we were done with the punishment and the gods promised us the land we were supposed to punish, the people became sorry and begged the gods of the land. They appeased the gods of the land, so the gods of the land allowed them to stay or inhabit the land back, said the dwarves. When this happened, the dwarves had nowhere to go, so they begged the gods to take them back or to make them vanish as they always did. But the gods did not pay attention to them this time. The gods did not help them, so they were left wandering on the land and they had nowhere to go. That was how they came to seek asylum in King Stefan's village. We know we are a curse, they said. We know we are evil spirits inhabiting this ungodly body. And all this while the people were so scared because they spoke with such evil in their tone. The people of Mana, being the kind people they always were so moved by the dwarf's story. They told King Stefan that the dwarves could stay and that it was no problem and they wanted the dwarves to stay. King Stefan also did feel sorry for them and agreed the dwarves could stay. The only person who vehemented was the chief priest, saying, No, these people are curses and they must be driven away. But unfortunately, no one listened to him as they were all moved by the dwarf's story. It was agreed by the villagers in King Stefan that the dwarves would live in the village, but only if they lived in the outskirts of the village and never bothered to anyone or never spoke to anyone because their appearance was terrifying. So 2 years passed by, and in time, some strange things started happening in the village. Women who were pregnant lost their children, and the babies now appeared in the bellies of their husbands. So basically, men were pregnant, people were turning into goats, children were running away, rats just scurried along the village. It was so much chaos. Plants refused to grow, and everything seemed to be falling apart in the village. When this happened, we can observe the chief priest going to the outskirts of the village to see the dwarves. And after the chief priest had been around the dwarves and studied them for a while, everybody could see the chief priest laughing. And in the next few weeks, the chief priest packed all of his belongings and left the village of Mana. Nobody knew why, but the problems were still very much occurrent in Mana. So the dwarves saw this and they started helping the people little by little. They would bring plants that would cure the people's sickness. They would find the children which had turned into goats or run away from the village. They would try and help as much as possible as they can. When King Stefan saw this, he decided to take the opportunity to go to them and then ask them to permanently help him. The dwarf said okay. So the dwarf said in order for them to help the people who had turned into goats, they had to come and stay in the village. So in time, everybody agreed to this because they really needed help. So in time, the dwarves inhabited the village. They came to stay with the people whose horns have now become like goats, and everything was going okay. The people seemed to be getting better, and gradually they started turning into people. But the problem of the men getting pregnant instead of the women was still not yet solved. It was many moons before the dwarves came up to King Stefan and told King Stefan, in order for these things to go away, we must sleep or lay down with the women of your village. Everybody was so disgusted by this, especially the women of the village, because, believe it or not, they had already complained to King Stefan that the dwarves were looking at them in a very unusual way, and they were terrified by this. But because the dwarves were of great help to the king and the people, the women were severely punished, some even killed. So when this happened, the women couldn't speak up. But King Stefan thought about this for a while, and when the problems got eventually worse, he went up to the dwarves and said, come and do what you have to do. So the dwarves inhabited the villages, and they took the wives of Mana as their wives. And immediately this happened, every problem the village of Mana had been facing became 11 times worse. More people turned into goats, more children disappeared, and everything was worse. One day, the king himself turned into a goat, and then he realized he had been fooled. The king wanted his beloved chief priest, and he got to know of why the chief priest left the village laughing so sarcastically. It had turned out that the chief priest had gone to the outskirts of the village to talk with the dwarves, or at least put an end to the charade that they were playing. But when he got there, he heard of the dwarves' foolish plan to overtake the village of Mana. The chief priest wanted to tell the king, but in coming back, he heard the king insulting him to some of the village people. And because the chief priest had so much pride, he vanished with the rest of his family before calamity could strike, as he knew how dangerous these evil spirits were. King Stefan then realized that he had been fooled, and the very next day he was killed, and the village of Mana became that of an evil forest. The once peaceful village turned into chaos that nobody could understand. The end.